Awesome. Thank everyone for being here. Very excited about this panel today. Sitting with some amazing people. Thank you to Baird for allowing us this space today. And of course, MKE Tech. My name is Shakia. Some people call me Kia. However you feel, I'm both of those girls. I am the Director of Member Growth and Engagement for MKE Tech, also own Spin MKE, and so very, very passionate about just this topic that we're going to talk about, the future of work. I wanted to start with the panelists kind of introducing themselves and talking about why this topic is also passionate for them as well. So we'll start with Miss Amina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I am a chronic entrepreneur, and I use that word very intentionally. Serial doesn't quite cut it because I kind of feel like to do more than one startup requires a little bit of sickness, a little crazy.
That's okay. That's good though.
And my latest startup is in the future of work conversation, and effectively, to nutshell it, it's a platform similar to Airbnb. But instead of overnight accommodations, we offer flexible workspaces that are rentable by the day. So effectively what we do is we take homes, guest houses, apartments, any kind of residential property. We are starting to dabble in commercial properties and outfit them with really great workplace amenities and then offer them up for companies to do offsites or team meetings or any kind of collaborative, even solo work. But critically, rented by the day and also in residential areas so that people don't have to commute very far. I think we probably all wouldn't be here today if we didn't all realize to some extent that the pandemic changed some things.
Yes.
And over the last 2 years, many of us have gotten used to not having to commute very far and having a certain sense of flexibility in our lives. And I believe, and I feel like we'll get into this conversation a bit more deeply in a little bit, I believe that offering only 2 options for working professionals, working from home, or coming to a city center to go to a traditional office is too binary.
Right.
And that there should be more flexibility in that because both of those have benefits, but they also have drawbacks. And I believe that there's a whole host of ways to work remotely that don't have to be as isolating as working from home. And that you can work collaboratively without going to a traditional office either.
Love it. And as Amina said, we'll get further into the topic of future of work, but I want Aaron to introduce himself, what he does, his experience, and why he's just passionate about this topic as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ayrton Bryan, I come from a corporate and nonprofit space right now with Rockwell Automation and MK Black respectively. Have a heavy background in terms of physical safety, so keeping people from tripping over stuff in manufacturing, from electrocuting themselves. And on that journey and like growing in that field, learned that the most effective way to provide physical safety was to provide mental safety or psychological safety, which is a term some people may be familiar with. And so it's creating spaces where people can have authentic sharing of ideas, bring up issues, and address situations before they become larger problems. And so really identification of a hazard before it becomes an accident. And when you move that into the space where we work, where we're coming together, an accident could be a blow up at a coworker, an accident could be a horrible interaction with a boss, that separation. And so I think that one huge element of creating those safe spaces are how are we addressing the ways people like to work. Not everybody wants to sit in a seat 5 times a week, go into the office, have an hour and 30-minute commute when they may have home life, personal responsibilities, interests. As we expand our ability following the pandemic to accommodate some of those things, heck, the reason I'm able to be here is because of that expansion of some of that flow, that trust, and ability to engage in different spaces. And so really interested to see how that continues to increase the ability of teams to work together without having the traditional mindset of you have to be sitting in the same place in this room, because having one model for what are the diverse teams we're trying to build in a lot of ways has shown that it's not the most effective way. So really excited to see the space expand.
Yes. And then last but not least, Mr. Josh Davis, if you can just give us a little bit about you and then your passion on the topic.
Sure. I'm Josh Davis. I'm a Director of Solution Architecture for Expedient Data Centers. We own and operate about 14 availability zones across 10 different cities in the United States today. My team is responsible for gathering technical requirements and putting together technical solutions for cloud and for getting all of the technology into the hands of the people that we're describing in these models. So I'm just really passionate about understanding some of the new ideas that are on leaders' minds with respect to how we're going to be working in the future so that I can plan around conversations for my team moving forward.
Awesome. And everyone can hear us, right? Okay. I just wanted to make sure you heard all of this greatness that's coming off the panel. So I'm just going to read, I did a little homework before going into the question. So talking about the future of work, the great global work from home experiment, which was created, of course, by COVID-19, created this work in the future kind of platform. So as organizations ease back into this office life, it was a study that was done by Gallup. And it talked about the new chapters just beginning to write itself, but navigating the journey back to office, or if it's remote learning, how organizations are structured. A lot of organizations, businesses, and founders are struggling in this space of trying to figure that out. And so with that, my question to the panel is, what is the future of work, and what do you think that looks like?
That is a very big question.
I know.
I certainly will not claim to have all the answers. Mm-hmm. I believe that whether full returns 5 days per week or partial returns 1, 2, or 3 days a week, and forcing people to come back twice a week is still a mandate. That's not flexibility. That is still a condition in which people feel like they are defying their boss if they don't go. The paradox, however, is what the number one reason people go to the office is to see their colleagues. But if their colleagues' schedules don't line up with theirs, then you commute 20 minutes to an office and pay for parking or whatever comes along with that. And then nobody that you wanted to see is there, and so why did you go? And so the paradox comes from, well, how do we align people's schedules and have them come together without forcing them? Well, you got to make them want to come.
Yep.
And right now, people don't.
Nope.
At $3.50 a gallon, especially here, at $5.50 a gallon in Portland, where I'm living right now, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And not everybody can afford that.
Yeah. Sometimes it's the convenience, right, of a lifestyle. Anyone else want to tackle that question?
Sure. So, when we talk about the different models and what I think the future of work is going to be, it's definitely something that's hybrid and something that needs to be fluid and agile. So none of the teams that I've spoken to in the past 6 months are doing what they did 18 months ago. Something has changed, and I expect that when I follow up with them 6 months from now, there's going to be something not quite where we left off. And I expect that to be the new normal, if anything. So my guidance has been to any leader that will listen to make decisions that are going to be right for today and then defendable for the leaders of tomorrow, whoever's going to be following you in that. So that often means avoiding things like vendor lock-in or making sure that you explore options that are going to be most accessible to most people. From a technology perspective, we're seeing a lot of response from the vendor space to address all of the different models that people are talking about. So if you work in a corporate space, this means being able to step into a conference room and have your gadget actually work. If you're home in your office, you want the same experience as if you were on site or in a corporate headquarters. So I mean, those are all of the things that we're folding into a conversation about being flexible. Those are things that were rigid in the past and they can't be anymore.
Awesome. You want to touch it, or you okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Real quick. For me, it's really centered around well-being. When you look at currently how a lot of larger organizations approach shareholders, I don't see a lot of change necessarily to that model in terms of how shareholders are financially addressed. And so when you look at the broader group of stakeholders, how are you going to offer things? How are you going to bring them into the workplace? We have the Great Resignation, as we heard about, and also people just transferring. They realize, well, maybe I can do a piece here versus some of the more traditional look back in terms of I'll be at one location 40 hours a week. And that's to say that if employers are going to keep people, they're going to have to be more cognizant around well-being. And I see the ability to work flexibly for those that can as a huge element of well-being. And not only that, that ability to create flexible work for those that can work remotely, for those that can't and may have to be somewhere to physically produce or physically impact something, you're going to have to figure out different methods of well-being to bring into their life space. So I think employee well-being and worker well-being is going to be a huge dynamic that we have to put a lot of thought into and understanding, and realize that it's a very varied topic and different by the individual.
Awesome. Aren't they so zen? I'm up here all calm, like, oh, their voices are just so calming. I'm up here, I'm like always flipping. My mind is 20,000 places, and I'm like, oh. Awesome. So just to go back to that study of Gallup, it talked about 70 million U.S. workers can do their job working remotely. Only 2 in 10 remote capable employees are currently working fully on site. And when an employee's location preference doesn't match their work location, engagement drops, right? And so kind of following up on that question, if we look at remote and the hybrid trends, when you look at your business or your company, how is that shaping up? How are you seeing the future of work in your business, your company, as well as in your startup, Amina?
Well, I can answer that question from 2 perspectives. First of all, as we grow Radius, we are a fully remote team ourselves. And we gather so we do a lot of work asynchronously, and then we communicate using tools like Slack and email, of course. And then we'll gather synchronously in virtual settings like on Zoom. Okay. And then, when appropriate, we meet in person. And the reason that we've chosen to build our company in this way is because, A, as a startup, we don't have excess funds. And so to spend money on a 10-year commercial lease that gives us access to a space 7 days a week, when we only need that space maybe once a week in order to gather, maybe even once every 2 weeks. Because I do feel like there's a reason that we are here together in a room, right? And the engagement that we're already having and will continue to have together as a group is more powerful than had we been 100% digital, right? So we're humans, and we're always going to be social in that way. The other reason that we chose to do it this way is because, I don't know if anybody has heard of self-determination theory, but it's basically a psychological theory that human beings need 3 things in life in order to feel fulfilled. Okay. One is autonomy. One is a sense of competence, that if we put our minds and effort into something, that we'll get good at it. And 3 is relatedness, is the social aspect and feeling connected. And that first one, autonomy, is huge. It's that freedom. And so what these 2 gentlemen were talking about, iterating and having fluid models, but then also offering flexibility, true flexibility and choice to employees, is what is a big part of not just keeping people engaged, but giving them the freedom to feel fulfilled, not just at work, but in life. And so as we talk about the future of work, I actually think that we're talking about the future of life, and feeling fulfilled in the grander scheme of things.
Right. Thank you. Anybody want to follow up on that?
Yeah. In regards to thinking about that, it's 2 different sides. From a corporate space, there is an expectation where, hey, I spend some time on site, and there have been positions that have been able to move into fully remote just based off of discussion and really what the individual's interests are, and finding that with certain individuals that, hey, if they have the same level of productivity based off of their job, or even greater productivity, having conversations and dialogues. I think it's been interesting in that it's had to expand somewhat of our ability to have maybe some more uncomfortable conversations, as if if somebody's working at home and you see a decline in terms of their work output, you just have to have an honest conversation. It's not, I need you back in this seat. It's like, what are some of the things you're missing? And so it's challenging those in leadership, those that work across business groups to have more of an empathetic understanding, which a lot of studies have shown that empathy is the #1 quality to have effective leadership in the workplace. And so it's an uncomfortable space that people are entering. And on the flip side of that, with some of the nonprofit work, completely remote, asynchronous, and have actually gotten feedback that in some cases, for a sense of interactivity or legitimacy to groups, you do need a space. And so it's that balance of, well, how am I leveraging space, and am I using it effectively? Am I using it for a purpose that's convening people, having some of that relatedness aspect that Mina highlighted, or is it to pay resources that may not necessarily be had? So it's a complex thing to think about in terms of, well, what is the right space for me? What is the right relationship with space? And so expanding the definition of what space means, I think, is a really important conversation to have at this time, because it looks different for different teams, different groups, and I think in an interesting way is really bringing back some of that, well, how honest are our conversations piece, especially when they can't always be face-to-face.
Right. Yeah.
Two-part response here, so feel free to play the Forrest Gump theme or whatever you guys play when these get too long. But the first one is kind of managery, and I'm a little embarrassed to be like thinking in these terms at this point. But I found that it's been helpful when we're all remote and dispersed to have just a lot more clear goals that people are striving for, just much clearer metrics around success. For some reason, that just additional level of accountability has just worked out well for everyone, that people have appreciated it, and I just don't know that we would have in the former models of work. It may have come off more as micromanaging, but in this space, it just makes sense to be able to check in on things, and that's feedback I've gotten from my team. My team is they're a nerdy bunch. They are. I mean, it's sales engineers. These are highly technical guys, and our team call is like an hour-long SNL skit, just dealing with all of the opinions that they have about technologies that we're dealing with. And so that's the second thing. Being able to find that virtual water cooler moment has been pretty important. So we have this call, there's an agenda, and I mean, they don't know this. I'm always on them about making sure we get things done, but I'm hoping secretly that for the first 15 minutes we get absolutely nothing done, and that they're able to connect and they have other conversations that spiral off of that. And so, you know, whatever that is in your space, I encourage you to feed it, to nurture it, even if you have to pretend that you don't like it so that they like it even more.
Right. Great. Having that leadership and understanding that, I think, is key, especially although I am an entrepreneur working in a space, having that engagement from a leader and being able to understand that we do need that space to just be, right? Especially when you're working virtually, you want to just be with your people before you jump right in. So I love that call out. But me and Amina met before this, and I was learning about the company, and she said something that kind of struck this passion that I have, which is diversity, and how do we allow diversity to be in every space. And you were talking about one of the ways that Radius can help with that is by being able to have access to all. Yep. And so my question, if you remember that part of the conversation, how does diversity and access play a part in remote and hybrid work, and why is this an important part?
And I will reserve my comments for the aspects of that conversation that I can personally speak to more closely, and then perhaps ping some other folks on the panel for more personal takes as well. There's a new term that's started to make its rounds in the future of work conversation, and it's that of proximity bias or location bias. That those folks who are seen by the boss more regularly may then have a stronger rapport with them and might be more likely to be promoted or be given other opportunities to grow within the organization. And statistically, It's the folks who already struggle for equality in the workplace that are most likely to be affected by proximity bias. Because, and I'm going to use the example of working parents, but I think that this spans far beyond into various other demographics of folks who have barriers to commuting regularly to the office. Working moms are among one class of folks who have more barriers to getting to the office regularly and being seen by their colleagues and their boss and having their work recognized potentially at the same degrees as their white male counterparts. So how do we solve that?
Yeah.
Because on one hand, that's a challenge. On the other hand, working moms are, if they work for a company that's offering that kind of flexibility and choice, that's actually a really well-intentioned offer.
Right.
But it may backfire if we're not careful. And one of the reasons that I am so excited to be building a solution like Radius is because our spaces are meant to be collaborative. So you're getting together with people, with colleagues, with your boss, but in a place that's far more convenient for you than going to a city center, because potentially it's your neighbor's guest house or even their house when they've left to go to the office for the day. And it can be booked for a company meeting of 5, 10, 15 people. And now, instead of commuting long distances and spending the whole day and trying to figure out childcare and what happens if that falls through, or another kid at daycare gets sick and then you have to rush home, perhaps you just walk 5 minutes, get a meeting done, have that recognition and that rapport building that happens so much faster in person, but then go back home.
Yeah.
And so in this conversation where companies are trying to figure out what does a hybrid model look like, that's one of the reasons that I was saying in the beginning that I think having only a traditional office versus working from home as part of the conversation is too simplistic, and that there are so many ways, not just Radius, there's so many ways to work in person remotely. And actually, because I'm already, cue the Forrest Gump music, I'm already going on a little bit long.
Yeah.
I would eventually like to also comment on a miscommunication in some terminology in the future of work, but I'll hold that comment for now.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But just to follow up, when we had the conversation, actually said proximity, but also location and people having the ability to work in various of companies because of transportation and outskirts and different things. But the city future of work allows access not just for working mothers, which I am a working mother, but people that live in communities that don't have access to proper transportation or city transportation. And so that kind of led into how not only is it building out the ability to expand, but the ability for communities that are non-traditionally, they don't have that ability to commute out, have that access to be a part of different companies or opportunities they wouldn't have been in the past. So just wanted to add that on. But your thoughts on that, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to jump right on that actually, in that when we initially spoke, that's one of the things that stood out to me is that think how hiring events could change. We talk about hiring from diverse communities, from communities that don't reflect some of what we've seen traditionally in the workplace. We know that geography plays a role in where certain groups often live in really any urban space, rural space, and so you can move and activate to those places with more flexible work options and can bring some of the jobs to them to offer that openness, that welcoming as the institution with more resources and traditional power in that sense, to be able to extend that versus calling people to say, hey, we want to have a diverse slate of candidates and it'll just be at on the lakefront. Like some people in Milwaukee, just as an example, live across the highway and haven't even seen the lake before.
Yeah.
They've never seen Lake Michigan. And so how are we understanding in all of our locations how we're going to effectively diversify for not only moral implications, but the business implications as well in terms of diversity of thought. So really accessing that, not just remote work, but also remote hiring, remote engagement, remote team building. And so knowing that that can be more fluid and intentionally placed in different communities can help play into making some of those biases more uniform versus making the biases disappear completely. So using them as a tool.
Love it. Josh?
Sure. So I guess I'll just start off by saying that in my personal experience, I've found diverse teams to simply be more attractive and inviting than non-diverse teams, especially in selling space, which I find myself in pretty frequently. I'll have conversations by the end of the day going from Boston to Memphis. I'm in Milwaukee right now, to Phoenix, and just across the board, being able to encounter a room, whether it's a real one like this one or a virtual space that has a variety of backgrounds and approaches to a problem and even ways of speaking. And it just goes a very long way. The teams that I'm talking to, IT teams across verticals and across the country, they're all very different. They're different. There's some similarities that I like to capitalize on, but they're distinct in a lot of ways. And so understanding what's distinct about your organization and your team and how you show up and then showcasing that, it's invaluable.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So as we continue with that thought in mind, but also adding how can employers create a more flexible, equitable, healthy, and profitable workspace? I know that was a lot. By thinking about the future of work, right? So thinking about what your company does, thinking about the tools that your company offers, and just being in that space. How can a company create something that is beneficial, right, to not only just their profit margin, but to their individuals, to their employees, their team, when thinking about the future of work and what that could be? Anybody?
Yeah, I can jump into that one. I think taking a model or taking a lesson from what the future of work looks like. We've talked a lot about some of the different approaches and how it takes more than option A or option B to create spaces where people can do some of their best work. I think leveraging that same mindset and applying that to different types of workers and mentalities. I mean, traditionally, I'll use manufacturing as a background. I was at a company where we did personality profiles. It was red, yellow, green, and blue. Everyone that was in top leadership in North America was a red, and then I saw myself as a green. I was like, well, guess I'll be leaving here, which I eventually did. But it's one of those situations where how are you engaging people that aren't just like you? How are you making sure that leadership and different levels throughout an organization have diversity? Because there are going to be fewer spots as you move up. And if the same people are making decisions based off of what they consider their skill set, so I believe it's affinity bias, but saying that that person's like me, they must have similar skills to be able to advance. Yeah. If we aren't having really honest conversations about that and understanding, well, how do I leverage people that aren't like me? How do I work with people that are like me? And a large part of that could be the spaces we're using. It's like, hey, instead of meeting in my office, what if we have an offsite? Instead of our typical offsite, which is normally at a bar, what if we went to a park or a garden? Like helping figure out what some of the ways we can engage different groups of people by having some of those conversations. It's like, where do you feel like your most authentic version of speaking up? Or even if it's not speaking up, sharing ideas, whatever format that can look like. And so how we lean and leverage some of this ability to use different spaces and work methodologies to bring out different skill sets from people, I think answers profitability, engagement, because even with what we currently do have with one or two approaches, so many people aren't feeling activated despite having lots of talents to contribute.
Love that. I know, love that.
Yeah. If I were to throw out one thought on this, it would be to engage second order thinking or even third order thinking. So as we are looking at the menu of options for the future of work, which has thousands of different permutations, it's not just looking at solutions, and I love what you just said about that greater engagement and leadership from diverse perspectives, but also considering what second-order consequences could come from a solution. You could put forward a very well-intentioned solution, and it could solve a challenge for a demographic over here, but it could actually exacerbate an existing problem over here. And I think that it's our responsibility, not just as employers, but also teammates. It's our collective responsibility to think a little bit more deeply about the systems that we're putting into place. And as Josh mentioned, be iterative about it. Whether we're a part of a startup or an established large company, it almost requires a bit of startup mentality where you come up with something, hopefully collaboratively with your team, put it out there, test it, and then iterate and rinse and repeat. And just, I think that's how we're all going to figure out how the future really looks for ourselves, but then also our individual organizations.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so fail fast to
Yeah.
some
There
extent
you go.
as far as
Yeah.
iterating is concerned.
Much more succinct.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, sure. I kind of going back to the goals, OKRs, KPIs, whatever, performance methodology your leadership is hawking this year, like whatever that is. I think in terms of the future of work, if we're talking about planning for a future, it needs to be sustainable. And I've found that to be the case when I had a decent mix of quantitative and qualitative metrics. That quantitative one usually speaks to profitability, what you're describing. I vote yes to profitability.
Yes, 100%.
But I'm also on board with feeling that sense of competence and well-being. And those qualitative metrics are really what help drive that when I can show that to the team as well.
Yeah.
This is how much you've done, and this is how you feel about it, and we feel pretty good about it, right? Let's do some more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can add just one more thing regarding this thinking a little bit differently, maybe than we have been. I have a bit of a pet peeve, and I'd like to just air a grievance for a moment
Sounds
here.
like it. Come on.
I just need to vent for a second.
It sounds. Go for it.
But I hope one thing that I've been really passionate about is also reframing and potentially coming up with a new globally aligned definition of remote work. Because many of us don't realize that we are almost all of us are using the term remote differently, but without realizing it, we're actually talking about different things a lot of the times. And just yesterday, I was speaking with a woman who is doing a lot of remote work and is meeting with people, we're meeting with clients in various settings, in offices, in coffee shops, and starting to use Radius as well. And she made a point about how she misses being in person, and these in-person interactions are so important. And that's why sometimes people want to go back to the office. And I stopped her right there because she was making the inference that remote work is isolating.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is actually incorrect. And it completely depends on what your definition of remote actually is. Is your definition of remote being away from a central office? Or is your definition of remote away from people? And the reason that this is an issue is because for the first year and a half of the pandemic, remote work was synonymous with working from home.
Yeah.
And working from home is generally pretty isolating. You're not going to have a 10-person meeting in your own living room. But working from home is only one slice of the pie that represents remote
Everything,
work.
right.
If you define remote work as being away from the corporate office, if you define it as being away from people, then of course you're going to think it's lonely. And if you are in people ops or HR or any kind of higher level strategy and you're implementing policies for your organization based on flawed thinking that remote work is lonely,
Yeah.
and you generalize the loneliness of working from home or the burnout or the distractions, all the pain points of working from home, if you generalize them
Yeah.
to remote work as a whole, then of course you're going to create policies that force everybody back. So I think that we need a new definition of remote work, and I propose that we make it away from the corporate office. And if we do that, and we actually, I wish that I had like a whiteboard and I would scribble all kinds of things, because we can plot them on an XY axis. The Y-axis, thank you. The Y-axis being the location. Let's say this is at the corporate office, and this is remote. And then this x-axis
The
is
middle one.
togetherness
Yeah.
or aloneness, right? And so you can be together and at the office, which was 2019 and before, and a little bit now, but not quite as much.
Yeah.
Then there's alone and remote, and that's working from home. That's what the pandemic forced us into, which is not necessarily ideal. It could be for some, but not for all. Then there's alone at the office, which is the worst case scenario, because you're wasting all kinds of money on rent and wasting money on fuel. For what?
Because we have
Sorry,
a
I'm getting a little
building.
heated here.
Yes,
I
we
really
have a
did need to get
building.
this
We
out.
have a space.
And then you have that fourth quadrant, which is remote and together. Thank you so much. And I believe that remote and together, whether
Everywhere
it's in a
together.
park,
Yeah.
it's in a coffee shop, it's at a co-working space, it's at a radius space, it's in a place like this. Because for me, this is remote.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to work remotely, and they don't have to be lonely or isolating. And I think once we align on these definitions just a little bit more clearly, words matter.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. Me being an introvert that has to extrovert sometimes, the loneliness is great. But just following up on that, there is a difference, and I do believe everyone needs a model that works for their company, their space, right? Their overall goals, and that's why I brought up like the access, but the profitability, the engagement, but also how do you continue to grow? So before we get ready to take questions, my last question to the panel is what maybe advice would you leave to founders, entrepreneurs, or even leaders that may be listening to this information on how to start thinking about the future for their business and their employees?
I would.
I have one. Yeah, go ahead. No,
yeah.
go. I want to go. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to sit on it.
No problem.
Yeah.
Mine is don't forget the power of a no agenda meeting. And that could be grabbing coffee with someone, just sitting down, having a sandwich. Like it is miraculous, to your earlier point, just how much like being a person can offer opportunities with somebody. It's very easy, particularly when you're like, I'm focused on this growth. I need this amount of money to reach the next stage. That to very intentionally say, this has to have this work product. This has to have this outcome. And a lot of the people in this room have really helped me understand the importance of just sometimes breaking bread, sitting down for no other reason than sitting down and like seeing that person as them, because that's what the connectivity is. That's where, I mean, entrepreneurship was born from. It's that idea of how do we bring new pieces of things together to create something brand
Love
new.
it.
So
Love
yeah.
that. I hope somebody took notes. Send that to me. Okay.
That's fun. Yeah.
So I guess I would recommend, whether you're starting off or keeping something going, just staying outcome focused rather than focusing on exactly how something's going to be accomplished. You know, one of the things that I've seen happen in the past 18 months is that people have gotten so task oriented that for periods of time we sort of forget how to dream. And you know, in order to do that, we really just need to think about what it is we want to have happen. What would this look like if we were done, and surround ourselves with people who can, you know, speak into that. And then by all means, you know, after we've agreed that this is a great outcome that we want to pursue, then, you know, to find someone that is that tactician that will explain how to do this. And I'm speaking a lot of out of our consulting approach, even from technology perspective. I'm constantly reminding teams, like, let's talk about what the requirements are. This is what we're trying to get to. And I promise you, I'm going to offer you 3 different ways to do that, whether it's a cloud strategy or supporting remote workers. But you know, just help me understand what your goals are on the front side.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think my answer is centered around trust. And maybe that speaks to a little bit of your answer as well, and breaking bread and developing those relationships. Right from the get-go, hiring people that you trust,
That part.
but then making the effort with the folks that we're already working with, it's to foster those relationships so that whether they're working, you know, 5 inches away from you, or 5 miles away from you, or maybe 5 cities away, that the culture doesn't have to suffer because of physical distance, but some people accuse employers of forcing people back to an office because they want to keep an eye on their work. And, micromanage and make sure tasks are being done, and that signals just a lack of trust.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to say that there's a magic bullet here, but I do feel like if we were to get close to one, it would probably be trusting each other.
Yeah. And just to kind of end off, I would challenge you, if you're a leader, to just kind of add on to all of that, to learn what your strengths are. And if you are challenged with that trusting issue or that remote, to bring in the help, right? Because as Amina said, the culture doesn't have to die. Engagement can still grow. I worked in a company for almost 2.5 years before I even met people in person, and one of my best experiences. Love it, startup, and I think I knew all the babies' birthdays, and again, never met any of those individuals in person. So it is about the leadership, it is about the thought process, it's about your perspective, but again, it's about the outcomes, right? It is about seeing people as people, and it's about trusting. So awesome. Before we end, we will have time for questions for these amazing people. Are there any questions in the audience?
First of all, great conversation. Thank you to all of you. I had a chance to meet Nina yesterday. Sorry. You bet. My name's Jeremy. I've worked in industry over the last decades related to all of you, so I'd have a ton of questions, but I'll try to generalize this one. Specifically because I am now selling co-working space, very related to what Mina's doing. But I'm also interested in, I'm a single father. My roots are here. I coach. I have to be here. But for maybe you guys who've worked across the country, I'm interested in working for a company in Denver, New York, right? Any of those cities that I may want to go to from time to time, but be here. And so with somebody with 2 decades of work experience, mainly in sales, technology, and now this, am I an attractive candidate to a company that's across the country, or do I have to continue to look for my job here in Milwaukee? And thank you.
Yeah. I can hop into that one. I would say immensely, and part of that is in terms of bringing in resources and help. I am a terrible resume writer, so I hired a resume writing company to do that. That's it. Knowing your strengths is also being open and honest about your weaknesses. So knowing if there's something where if it's like, hey, I have a story, I just need it written I'm from the South, so I use a lot of analogies. I need it written like a novel versus like an engineering report. So bringing in specialists to help and resources and paths that you can, and then they're able to piece together some of that information so you can focus on the parts that you have. I think what a lot of successful people use is that advantage to bring in somebody that can work on this part of what I'm doing. It's almost counterintuitive because we have to so often lean into, well, I need to learn this new talent, learn this new skill. There are times when that's the only option, but in each of those situations, are you looking at that second, third order thinking to say, the outcome is I need this accomplished. What resources can I pull together to help give that direction? And I think that makes it to where, raw talent-wise, absolutely, I think anybody would want that. And it's just, if I want to enter at the level I want, how am I telling the story in a way that's with them? And that comes to, hey, I'm asking somebody from one of those companies like, hey, what was it like for you? Just some of that no agenda, to where it's really a holistic research experience versus just, looking at the website for 2-3 minutes.
Yeah. And I'll add on to that of, again, being a part of a company, and we hired in 26 different flagships. And the goal was, what did they bring to the team, right? But I also think it depends on the organization. Some organizations only have a focus of in-state. They need that community base. So learning about where is you're trying to go, and then why, and what are you bringing to them? Because exposure helps you grow. So when you're bringing in all of these different individuals, but it also needs to align with the company values. So I would say you have to start with that, of are they willing to hire someone that is not from there, and then what are you bringing to the team, right? I'm one of those, I'm going to LinkedIn you, inbox you. I had a goal, I wanted to be in New York for 3 months. I said I got to find a 3-month contract in New York. I went and found all the New York people that aligned with what I was trying to do, and I said I need to be there for 3 months. How do I make it happen, right?
You probably have more options now than ever before.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Right.
opened my mind to it.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
health work, right? I'm looking at consulting jobs that are coming up, but like my
Yeah.
roots are here. I cannot
Yeah.
for 10
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
So,
But right
I
now,
work for those companies, but I can't go.
yeah, and right now it's almost become meme-worthy that on a day that a company makes headlines that they're forcing everybody back to the office, there are 5 more flexible companies
Right, I know.
poaching all that talent that's about to quit.
Yeah.
So those companies are out there.
Brilliant. Yeah. Any other?
Hi. So this question is kind of, I guess, less of a question, more of a statement. I'm asking for perspective from each of you. And this is relating to the where part of work. So I'm sure, Amina, you'll have some thoughts on this. Well, the reality is that there are a ton of spaces to work, and commercial spaces, spaces like we're in today. And I think there's a little bit of kind of this notion from corporations that, like, well, we have this space, so we would like our employees to use it.
Yeah.
But are we only thinking about our employees, work scenarios when it comes to where? And there are tons of ways that we see corporations give philanthropically to the community in which they are located. And I guess I'm curious, just like, is there any sort of legitimacy or validity to a future where corporations are not only sharing their office spaces for panel discussions like this one, but also sharing their office spaces for people who don't have access to, the financial resources that one would need to rent a co-working space or go pay $6 for a cup of coffee to sit there for 3 hours and use free Wi-Fi? Like, how does the corporation's ownership of this space actually provide an opportunity to help the community's future of work, not just their own community's future of work, meaning their employees?
I love the philanthropic side of it, and I think that right now with so much vacant space, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you offer it up to the community? The question is, if a company's 10-year lease is 9 years in and they're starting to look at the economics of it, are they actually going to keep it at the end of the day? Will it provide enough of a return for it to be economically viable for them to continue doing it? There are a lot of companies right now who have signed leases in 2018, 2019 for 10 years, sometimes longer, and they're stuck. And so, yeah, let's make as efficient use of that space as we possibly can, hopefully not by forcing people into it, but by giving them the choice. My pie in the sky solution, though, for that is affordable housing. Is that there's so much vacant space, and all of the experts and the reports are saying that we're not going to go back to the same kind of utilization that we had pre-pandemic of commercial real estate, and that even pre-pandemic, occupancy rates were hovering somewhere between like 40 and 70%. Like, that's already low. And now, if we only get back to 50% of that, 50% or 40%, really, are we gonna keep a huge swath of square footage if it's only being utilized 20% of the time? So what do we turn it into? And yes, while we're in these leases, let's share it. Yeah. With people who either can't afford space or for events like this, absolutely. But we might be needing to rethink an entire sector because of this. And to me, that's inspiring. I think that it's an opportunity for us to, forgive the cliche term, disrupt, but disrupt in a way that advances society versus just disruption for disruption's sake.
I would say, as I plug the MK Tech Hub Coalition, just doing more things like partnerships and getting together with different organizations that have this same kind of shared thought and saying, we have this space anyway, what can we do to create this dynamic impact and disrupt? So I think leaders that are in these spaces are starting to think like that and understand, like, we have it, like, what can we do? But impact should be behind it. for just the change and the dynamics of what's needed.
Oh, I was going to say, as a quick note, to add to that, a great way to look into that, companies that are writing sustainability reports see what their alignments are. If you fall under that alignment, creating a story and coming with a package, particularly if you can work with, bring in other community partners, I think that makes a very valid case for stuff like that.
So my question is for anybody who can answer this, but who is doing that? Who is disrupting space, maybe around the country, around the world? Who can we take a note from?
That guy.
Yeah.
Nick, yeah, okay. But I mean, no, like truly, like making it work in corporate America, like looking at corporations to say, yeah, I love that idea of sharing space, opening it up to other, people in need potentially, or job seekers, or education. To say we've got buildings that are maybe 20 to 50% occupied. Why not collaborate? And who is doing that, if anyone?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think like Northwest Mutual on a smaller scale with like Cream City Labs is entrepreneurship based. I don't really know the exact model, but that's someone I would look at with a lot of that space is donated. Like even for us and most of the entrepreneurs in there, it's donated space. You're not paying for that. It's you aligning what their values are. And of course, they're a bigger corporation, but that's just an example that came to my mind of the Cream City Labs.
I think I have an analogy that, at least an analog to what we're doing in technology space, and then maybe we could find something in another space that's similar. But for the tech in particular, we've been talking with leaders about something called the sunk cost fallacy. It's just a way of thinking where you think you've put so much into something that you couldn't possibly pivot, and it's usually not the case. Someone from the outside looking in would tell you, dude, just do that instead, right? And so that comes into play a lot when we're talking about an investment into hardware and infrastructure and the tech that we use to get work done. And usually we're able to help people have a different type of assessment of what they have in their investment so they can pivot towards something like cloud, which if you think about is sort of a multi-tenant consolidation of physical space towards a shared resource, right? And so the other thing we've been doing that's probably a little bit closer to what you're describing with office space has been around the actual physical data centers that corporations have. They've got these fortified, chilled warehouses with rows and rows of computers in them to power your applications. And over the past 10 years, we've seen the density of that go through the roof, meaning I had 10 rows, and now I need like 1.5 to do the same amount of computing, which means I've got a lot of waste here, right? And so we're in a position where we've developed a model that allows us to buy the overall space, consolidate it, optimize it, and then show and sell back the rest of the space in a multi-tenant form.
Yep.
So
That's great.
if there are ways to apply that method towards the rest of the way the people are working, not just the way the computers are working,
Yeah.
to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commenting on the sunk cost fallacy, I don't know if you saw the headlines this morning about Facebook and Meta, but just like 10 minutes before I left to come here, one of the attendees who actually just stepped out, he sent me an article about how Meta is letting go of a major building in Manhattan right now. They poured $110 million into it, signed for 10 years. They still have 4 years left, and they're scrapping it. And that's a great example of a big company with a lot of sunk costs, but they're not falling into that trap. Partly it has to do with what their top line looks like versus their fixed costs. But they've done the math, and they've recognized it's actually going to cost them less in the long run to let go of that. But Manny, to your question, I was pointing at Nick in the back. For those of you who are streaming this, Nick O'Brien is activating these wonderful commercial spaces, retail and otherwise, that otherwise would be sitting vacant with pop-up co-working. That's a really great, sometimes philanthropic, sometimes paid opportunity, right, to activate these spaces. What we're doing at Radius is we're taking spaces that would be either underutilized or under monetized and turning them into by-the-day rentals. That's something that has not existed in residential real estate or commercial real estate. In commercial real estate, it doesn't make any financial sense for a broker to sell a space for a day. There's just no money in it for them in terms of commission. So why do, even for the month, it doesn't really make sense to do. And so to your point about kind of rethinking the way that existing models have, well, what if you can take a space like this and now monetize it on a per day basis, which actually will get you a higher day rate. But instead of having it used by only the one company for 99% of the time, offering it up to all kinds of people and having additional access.
Love that.
And think about the engagement that creates. Like we are constantly trying to attract new employees, new partners, things like that, and we're doing it online where we see 50,000 advertisements a day. In-person engagement is, I think it's overlooking in terms of value add. Yeah, maybe financially it's a sunk cost, but look at
Branding,
Exactly.
engagement. Awesome. Before we wrap up, we can take one more question. Oh, sorry.
Hi. So I come from a corporate setting, and I think every time I've gone into a different corporation, I always looked at company culture. And now I'm in the startup tech world, and what I notice is that in the startup tech world, people are working on their mission or just getting right into it and doing the work, getting their hands dirty. But I want to know what your approach or advice would be when you're in a startup. At what point do you start talking about culture to your employees and or collaborating with what that looks like for them so that the space is attractive and you keep their engagement?
Wow, love it. I say right away of understanding if the mission is not aligning with the culture, then how do you attack that? Because if you have, it's just like one bad apple. If you allow those behaviors to keep going where you're not addressing what culture is, then you have disgruntled, unengaged employees, and trying to do that virtually is terrible. So just from my approach in business is, I always say I'm the ice cream without the sprinkles and the whipped cream, right? I don't have that soft side. I'm very direct and transparent, but it's because it's the bottom line is how do we grow together? And so if that transparency is always there, that it's for the good, but we need to have these conversations. I feel that having that openness at all times doesn't allow for the space of kind of miscommunication. So I would just say you attack it right away and often.
I think that's such an important point about the transparency. Just diverging from your question for a minute, but I'll circle back. A lot of companies have been sending out surveys to their employees. How do you feel about working from home, working at the office, having flexibility, working asynchronously, and you get a bunch of answers back. And, you know, invariably you're going to get a diversity of answers. Not everybody's going to be aligned on their preferences, which means if you craft a policy that's based on the majority of those answers, there's always going to be somebody that disagrees with how that policy was crafted. The transparency part is where I think companies with strong cultures can really rise above, because if you don't just craft the policy, but you're transparent on how you came to put it out there and then test it and iterate, then those folks who feel aligned with the policy feel like they've been heard. But even those who don't align, who had conflicting answers, they at least understand, they feel like, hey, at least my opinion was taken into consideration, and even though the company went into a different direction, at least this was not just lip service. And so I think that transparency is a huge piece of the equation. And also related to your question, I know that from the very beginning of Radius's trajectory, you asked when do you have the conversation about culture? In my opinion, it's right from the very beginning. And as soon as we started bringing teammates on, one of the first things that we talked about was like my shortcomings as both a leader, but also just as a human. Like there are some things that I'm good at, and there are some things that I suck at, and I'm also, I love your metaphor of the ice cream. I'm like that too. I'm really to the point. And that doesn't sit well with some people. And I'm also kind of I'm my father's daughter. I'm a critical person. And that can be hard. And I don't want to be that way sometimes. But I lead with that, so hopefully it helps for other people to feel welcome to share who they really are too, and then make me better. And I'll try to do the same, and let's do this together. And if you don't align, then it's like dating. It's like you don't have to date everyone, right? You just like choose your demographics.
I'll help you get to the next space.
Right. Yeah. You find those people. But one last thing, and I'm sorry I'm droning on.
Yeah.
On one hand, finding like-minded people can be a great boon to the culture. But back to the point of diversity. If you're hiring too much for like-minded people, is it going to become this homogeneous pool of similar thinking, and then you're both missing out as an organization, and you're leaving people out of the conversation that could and should be a part of it.
Yeah. I know we just got the last call, and I will say, as leaders, never be scared to be developed. Never be scared to be challenged, and allow, if you're hearing something, consistently challenge yourself to see if it's true, right? As a leader, as a startup, or even as an employee. Any last thoughts from the panelists before we end? We're all looking at Josh like,
so I just want to say thank you for having us. It's been just really, I guess, inspiring to hear the questions and the dialogue, and for your guys' questions and comments as well. I mean, we think about a concept as big as the future of work. It's just nice to know that people are at least focused in that direction. Something has clearly happened to us all collectively that we've decided that we should take a moment. Let's take a beat and talk about where this is going and how we want to get there. So thank you for indulgence.
Yeah.
I would say thanks, and then seriously about that no agenda thing, reach out. Shakia has all of our information. I mean, we just happened to reach out during our first Rad Work Day and stay in touch. So I mean, just having conversations, getting thoughts going, realizing that everyone has something new to teach you, and just kind of being open in that perspective. So don't be, it can be awkward, or it might be, but a lot of things are awkward, so do it. Yeah. Like that was awkward answer. But real-time example,
But it was almost verbatim what I was going to say, so just keep in touch. I personally am quite active on LinkedIn, can connect there, but I've brought some business cards. If you all have business cards would like to exchange, let's keep in touch.
Awesome. Thank you guys for the time. Thank you for the opportunity. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Become a part of the coalition if you're not. Love spinning if you don't. And connect with these individuals up here. Thank you. You guys did.